at Warner Brothers Discovery, I'm looking at the internal elements, I'm looking at our productions, I'm looking at our content, how do we make it more diverse? How do we tell authentic stories? And that's how D&I should be positioned, in a way that you are really aligning to the internal and the external so that the messaging and what you truly believe in is consistent.
Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm joined by someone whom I admire and respect deeply. He's exceptionally well known within the world when it comes to diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity and culture, and his name is Asif Sadiq. He is currently the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer at Warner Brothers Discovery. He's had a phenomenal career working within various different sectors, and we're going to be discussing today what the global landscape looks like when it comes to all aspects of inclusion and even how ESG interplays within that. Welcome to the show, Asif.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
So, Asif, let's start off with the current role, where you're at, and a whistle stop as to how this came about, because you have been in many different places in your career and in your life, and it's abundantly obvious that all of these things now have come together to form the richness of experience that you impart within not only the employee landscape but also externally as well with the various speaking engagements.
Yes, definitely, and thank you. Yeah, it's been quite a journey of so many different industries, as you've mentioned, and it's fascinating when I reflect back on that time. Every experience was so valuable, and going from industry to industry, which wasn't sort of heard of before. It was almost that you work in one industry and you must have 10, 15 years experience in that industry. But I think the world around us has really changed and evolved, where there's this huge appreciation for having different ways of thinking, and almost at the core of diversity, right? Thinking differently, different lived experiences, and working in different industries brings that. Has given me that opportunity to truly understand that, and more so as well. There is sometimes this misconception that diversity, is so different in different organizations and in different industries. The truth is, diversity, equity, and inclusion is so similar. The challenges might be at different levels, or where they present themselves in different companies. But it's more or less the same everywhere. So it's been fascinating going on that journey, and really having an opportunity to broaden my horizon, working abroad, working in Germany and other parts of the world. Again, opens your mind up to so many different perspectives, different ways of how people communicate, learn, and cultural preferences, and it's huge. And now, again, heading up global diversity for a huge company like Warner Brothers Discovery, it's truly amazing. Just being able to look at it in so many different ways. We have representation globally in so many countries. And even within ourselves, there's so much diversity of what we do, from movies, games, experiences, and theme parks. And there is so much there. But really understanding each and every one of those areas is fascinating. And just the last piece actually is just, for me, what's been really sort of positive, especially with this role, is I don't look after diversity, equity, and inclusion in many of the sort of traditional ways that it has been in organizations, whereby I only look at the internal workforce element. At Warner Brothers Discovery, I'm looking at the internal elements, I'm looking at our productions, I'm looking at our content, how do we make it more diverse? How do we tell authentic stories? And that's how D&I should be positioned, in a way that you are really aligning to the internal and the external so that the messaging and what you truly believe in is consistent.
I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to embracing external and internal diversity, especially when it comes to on-screen representation, how we are imparting and utilizing great brands to foster early intervention as well with children and those who really do care about what they see on screen, what they hear, and how that impacts their own lives. Tell us a little bit about your personal background, because you have a wonderful family, you're super well traveled, and you have really interesting cultural background as well, Asif.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what's really sort of fascinating. So you know, for the listeners, I'm originally from East Africa. I grew up in Kenya, and yes, I've got two kids, which is very hard trying to be an active dad and a dad who's present, which again breaks the stereotypes, right? Like, you know, I think the world's changing, and acknowledging and understanding that is huge. But it's always fascinating because when people look at me, they form assumptions, right? Which is some of the challenges in the DEI space. The assumption is, oh, he's South Asian. I'm not. You know, I might have some roots, or you know, some elements of the culture of South Asia, but I am truly Kenyan. And it's fascinating because when you look at my experiences, my lived experiences, what that means, it's so different. So yes, you know, there's so many elements to that unique, authentic identity I have. And you know, I say this quite often, that when people assume that one element represents me, it's not true. You know, as you know, intersectionality is such a huge thing. But I've also discovered, in all honesty, that throughout my own career, different elements of that intersectionality have been important or less important. So, you know, if I go back 20 odd years, when I graduated, race was a huge element for me. You know, it was a challenge, it was a struggle. And you know, for an organization to truly make me feel included, race was a huge topic. Fast forward now, the young kids are a huge topic for me. You know, how do I be a present dad, a dad who's there? But also, I'm getting older, and you know, I've now discovered that you know, as you get older, you know, I'm unfortunately inheriting a number of disabilities, and that's making me think a lot more about disability inclusion. But that's important because each and every employee that any organization has, what diversity means to them throughout their career will change at different points. And it's important that we are agile and adaptable enough as organizations to capture that. So it shouldn't be that you join an organization and you're given, you know, you're assigned a identity, and then that has to be your identity throughout your career, because it will change. Everything changes, but that, you know, importance of us being able to adapt and change that is so big.
The way that you've articulated that is just beautiful. And again, I'm trying not to agree with everything you're saying here, but it is such an evolutionary process. You've mentioned in the last sentence alone that being a present dad, parenthood, caring responsibilities, clearly a huge dimension of diversity, which arguably is something that is invisible unless we were to ask the question. Yet then at the same time, there's the presumption around authenticity of identity. You've been presumed to be, say, South Asian in the past, but actually there's a richness to that experience, that lived experience, the experience living in different countries. I'm from Kenya, East Africa, and now working across the pond. So you're in the States at the moment, with the UK and the States, and the interplay there within a role which is really truly global. And I'm sure seeing some of these differentials between the current environment stateside to the UK and then globally is something not only fascinating, but something you've really been able to support given your prior experience.
Completely. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned from my own personal experience, and now sort of trying to apply it in the workplace, is moving away from dominant cultures. And what I mean by that is sometimes, you know, how we frame, or how we even frame the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion are based on a dominant culture, whether that's US culture or British culture. But just acknowledging that for us to be diverse and inclusive, everyone doesn't have to align to our culture. Everyone doesn't have to agree to our culture. We must respect other global cultures, the way people, you know, do things. You know, when I think of our global teams, should I approach, you know, our teams in Japan the same way I approach our teams in the UK, or our teams in India the same way, or our teams, you know, in Brazil the same way? No, it's not about them having to adapt to me or us, but it's about how do we adapt, and how do we not just see the world through our own cultural lens, but really appreciate the global sort of complexity difference of this. But what's always fascinating, and one of the things I say a lot, especially to our teams, is that globally diversity is so many different things, both visible, non-visible, and other elements. But inclusion is the same. It's consistent. To make someone feel included doesn't change wherever you are in the world. So we need to focus on the inclusion, but still understand that diversity might be different. And just the final point on that, many times we do, and I hear this so much, and I've heard it throughout my career, where we're trying to correct the world on where they should be from our dominant cultural perspective or dominant regions. We have to allow other countries, individuals globally, to go on a journey for themselves. Of course, they should align to the values of a company, what we believe in from a diversity, equity, and inclusion space. But we must also allow them the opportunity to go on that journey. We cannot expect them to go from where they are to where we are in a matter of hours, or through a single training, or through a single program. It is a journey that they have to go through, whether that's with their language, whether it's because language is another big thing, right? Like how people describe the same thing. And fascinatingly, just to tell you a story, I had someone the other day who mentioned, we were talking about disability inclusion, and someone in one of our, European offices mentioned the term handicapped. Now, someone else got quite sort of, offended that that's not the term we use and that's not the right term. Yes, but that is a term that some of the governments in that country still use. So yes, we need to help them, and we need to help evolve the language, but we can't just expect them to change when it's a journey that they must go on.
That is such a fascinating point that you raise. And immediately when you hear words like this, it does make you sit back for a moment. Yet at the same time, is it right for us to then be crucifying people for doing or saying the wrong thing, when actually this has been happening for many years, or it's something that's been said for many years?
And yeah, completely. And one of the things I truly believe in is that we've really come to a stage over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of advancements, as you know, in this space, but there's a lot of fear. There is so much fear of saying the wrong thing, not knowing which term to use. And I think that's actually taking us backwards. Why I say that is because unless we have conversations, unless we learn about our differences in a psychologically safe environment, how are we going to ever progress? And actually, diversity has never meant that we must agree on everything. We can have different opinions, of course, as long as we're not racist, sexist, homophobic, or anything like that. But we can disagree, but still come together to appreciate our differences and to respect them. But I really do think we need to move away from, just canceling someone because they said something wrong, but instead taking every opportunity where we get things wrong to create a learning environment, to say, actually, do you know what? Pull someone aside and say, hey, that term you used is probably not the best term because of these reasons. Try this, because that brings them into the conversation rather than pushing them away. And pushing people away will never advance any element of diversity if people feel uncomfortable and are not willing to or not willing to have a conversation about it. The conversations are hugely important.
Indeed. And you've mentioned the word journey a number of times. It is one that we will always be on. It's living, it's breathing, it's sleeping. It is like culture. We never say, hey, we're going to switch that off, or we're done with that now. Our kids will see this as something which is very, very different. I know if I ask my mum or my dad their take on some of the terminology used by the youth today, they'd say is, oh, I can't keep up with it all. It's absolutely something that they've understood within their generation, but not something that we want to be telling them off for. We need to be educating them. We need to be explaining to them. And like you say, bringing people along that journey. Now, talking of journeys and evolutions and DEI, I&D, D&I, diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, culture, which is often what we like to say. What's your take on the evolution of diversity and ESG? Because we've been seeing a huge amount of diversity professionals starting to blend roles or interconnect with the social aspects of ESG. And it's something that stakeholders, shareholders now are paying a real active interest in.
Yeah, so I do think it's, it's so interlinked in so many ways. When we think of that, social element of it, and how do we ensure that our staff feel that we are doing the things that matter to them? When whether it's from, something as simple as charity giving, or, the engagement and the opportunities we're creating around that space, it is so important that we're aligned and that we're really sort of aligned in what we believe in, both as a company and what our staff want to do. And I do, find, and in previous experiences, having looked after, social impact and D&I, that bringing it together and making sure there's an alignment really helps, to create that sense of, belonging for individuals within an organization, because then they feel that the company is really aligning to the values that they have and the things that they believe in. And I think that's a really important part of that sort of partnership, whether the role is under DEI or whether it's not. But there needs to be a clear sort of partnership and sort of link between the two if we're truly going to really sort of focus on issues, opportunities, challenges that matter to our people and us as an organization.
One of the things that I think is so superb about the role that you're in right now is it reports direct up into the CEO. And this is often a debate that has many different answers from diversity and inclusion and equity professionals that I speak with. And I'd be really keen to hear what your personal thoughts are, because having CEO buy-in, having board buy-in, really carving this role out as a significant driver of positive change in the C-suite, of course, is something I believe will happen. But given everything happening in the world at the moment, lots of change, economic environments, what's your take on the role, reporting lines, and some of the flux that we're seeing in the broader market?
Yeah, so I think it's a really important element. I mean, I work very closely, and have a sort of, reporting line as well into the CHRO, which I think is important. So I don't want to discount anyone who goes into that space. But to your point, having that direct, reporting line with the CEO and being present at all the board meetings, having a seat at the table is, absolutely groundbreaking. And I say that because then you are there and you're really weaving diversity, equity, and inclusion in to everything that's done. It really also really supports in driving change without multiple layers of barriers that many face in many organizations. It also gives you as a D&I professional a true oversight of the business, which I think is really useful, because sometimes, and having worked in other roles in other companies, sometimes you're told, right, like, we can't do this. And it's quite disappointing, because you're like, why? But I truly believe, and we should. But having a seat at the table, I know the reason or thinking behind so many different things. So it allows me to have a bigger picture and understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing different things, and how I can influence and impact some of those things. So I truly believe it's if not, one of the most critical elements of driving change. It just really sends a very positive message across the business, in the industry. But for the actual change and, the direction we want to go in this space, I think it's hugely a necessity for really any change within this space.
And I should caveat this as well by saying, just as fantastic also for all the chief diversity officers and others listening in, having the buy-in from CHROs, from the people function, is absolutely key. But this is ultimately about the message being sent internally, the message being sent externally.
Completely.
This is something that matters. And In fact, it was something that we were talking about it before was happening, a conversation earlier this week, is diversity is such a huge commercial lever to drive, what ought to be positive public policy change when it comes to governmental governmental level as well, and the impact that forward-thinking innovative businesses can have in this area is really something that government need to be paying attention to, and vice versa. Government can really be learning a huge amount from organizations that have the power and the influence to make changes for future generations of leaders, whilst also being commercial at the same time.
Completely.
The two do not need to be separate to one another.
Completely. And this is the evolution of, the whole role of a head of diversity, chief diversity officer, and so on. It's not just to put on, events, or, run a program or focus on training. I mean, those things are important. I don't want to dismiss them, but it is about the real sort of business side to this, right? Because that's where it's not a nice to have. It's critical for businesses to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging into the work that they're doing. But having that sort of opportunity through, being at the C-suite of a company makes a huge difference, because you can embed it into every element of the business, as opposed to just focusing on some of the traditional areas of diversity.
Indeed. I've got to stop agreeing with everything that you're saying. And we need to find something to disagree with each other on. But truly, it's the golden thread that weaves throughout all of the different areas. And you look at kind of supply chain and diversity and spend that goes into the communities in which we serve. You look at the employees that we have, and the fact that their diversity brings that innovation of thought, which is something that I know you speak about a huge amount, is having the diversity of thought, no matter what your background is key. But then also how that then gets projected into the outside world, whether it be through sales, commercial, marketing efforts, representation on the screen. And so literally it touches every single aspect. And I had a conversation with a CEO the other day and was saying to him, utilize your chief diversity officer as a strategic advisor to the work that you are doing, because that is what is happening in the world right now. And it is something that will continue on as we see the social aspects of ESG come to the fore. And he was saying investor relations, this and that and the other, it is something that we're seeing happening now with investment, impact funds, financials. It's all culminating together in something that means doing good really is finally actually good for business.
Completely. And the truth of it is, and again, I'm agreeing with you now completely with everything that you're saying, but when you think about it with products, services, whatever a business does that they're putting together, consumers of that are more diverse now, right? Because even when you look at it from a social economic background perspective, money's changed hands. Who is successful, where money sits within which communities, it has evolved. So if we are, when you think of companies that sell products, for example, they might have traditionally sold products or services to a particular sector group of the community, or the majority within the community, because that was the main buying power. That's shifting. When you think about, and even if I look at it from a global perspective, I can still remember, just to give you an example, when I was a young boy in Africa, in Kenya, the dream was always this, at the time it was about, UK products, and we wanted them, and, to really access that UK or American stuff. Now, and I go back Kenya quite often, people there have their own identity. They want to know, like, what is it to be a rich African? Like, they want to see that. They're not buying into the British dream or the American dream. They've got their own dream. Same in the Middle East. They've got their power. They want to see what it is to them. And to capture that, we must then adapt our, marketing, our products, and so on, so that they're talking to these groups, because they're not going to buy them if it doesn't talk to them. They want it to be them, even with something as simple as cars. I can remember car ads for some of the big car manufacturers being very much, trying to sell to that, Middle England, that, someone who's from a certain background. Now, I mean, look at the buying power. Look at some of the biggest car manufacturers. The biggest sales are coming out from, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. So that businesses need to adapt if they're going to be successful. But also understanding how consumers will in the future buy products, right? And this is not even just traditional ways of or elements of diversity. If you think about some of the biggest brands who are not around today, and again, out of respect, I don't want to mention them, but people can probably reflect on brands that they've seen growing up that are not here. If you just sort of try to bring it down to why they're not here because they did not adapt to the changing nature and the of consumer habits, buying power, and so on. And a lot of it is linked to diversity because generational diversity, different generations wanted to consume movies in a different way, so that changed. Or different generations wanted to look at services of other sorts of products in a different way. So we must adapt if we're truly going to be successful businesses in the future. And the authentic representation piece is huge. It's a piece of work that I'm really championing within the work that we do. How do we authentically represent communities? We shouldn't stereotype. We shouldn't have the same, or we shouldn't always have a negative story of a community. We need to tell the richness of the diversity within communities, the success stories. I can, again, just to give you a very, very quick example, I can remember being at university and I studied a degree in business management. And I remember at the time, every coursework, every case study, everything we learned never had anyone who looked like me. It was always about these successful business people who were from, backgrounds that were not, mine. So I never saw myself represented in that. I never thought when I left university that I could, sit on the board of a $100 billion company. It wasn't something that I'd ever seen. And today I reflect on it, how much of an impact did that have on me? A huge one, because I never saw representation. But when I look at the UK today as an example, if we take the 10 richest people in the UK, I think half of them look like me now because it's diversified, right? There's a lot of people with wealth. But it's important that those messages are in everything that we do, from education all the way through into our products. Because unless people cannot see themselves present in something, they're not going to buy it, they're not going to engage it, or they're not going to believe it.
Such powerful words, Asif, such powerful words. I don't even know where to start when it comes to summarizing the conversation that we've had, but we have covered so much ground. And I know that there are going to be a huge amount of takeaways for everyone who has been tuning in. But making sure you stay ahead of the curve for organizations, absolutely critical. We are in an environment right now where we have got to, as Asif has said, be nimble, be thinking about truly what the consumer wants, be also thinking about how we can embed early intervention, because future generations of leaders care about authenticity. They care about what they can see, what they can touch, what they can feel, and what they can hear. And all of that interlinks with diversity and ultimately the benefits, and celebrating these as well, whilst not having people feel fearful of the conversation. Safe spaces is something that really came up as a fantastic learning point, and something applicable across a number of different areas within business that I think is something I've certainly learned from this conversation. And finally, Asif, I really loved how you talked about the dominance of culture and the different perspectives, making sure that we really consider our own experiences before we judge others. How can we go to them as opposed to expect them to come to us? And finally, the complexities, the differences, the similarities, the rich tapestry that you've described within the context of intersectionality, I think has just been really, really great to hear. So thank you so much for joining on the show.
No problem. And I I just want to say, if there's one sort of final message, just to summarize that from my side as well, is as we go into the future, I've heard a lot of conversations about D&I dropping as we're going into financial uncertainty and the changing world around us. Now more than ever, it's important for us to double down on our efforts. And it really is the responsibility of each and every individual, and especially those leaders in this space. Because either you can sit back and accept that, oh, well, because of the financial uncertainty, things are going to have an impact within the D&I space, or you can actually have a positive impact during this time. And that really is up to all of us to make that change and make that drive. So yes, companies will go through change and uncertainty, but we can still make sure D&I is at the forefront of those conversations.
Indeed. Embrace it. Absolutely embrace it. Asif, it always is when I speak with you. It is an absolute joy. It is an absolute pleasure. I would encourage everyone who's tuning in to check out Asif's TED Talk and some of the work that he's been doing. It is honestly absolutely brilliant. If you know anyone who you think would benefit from listening to this podcast, or if you've been affected by any of the issues that have been raised, please do make sure you reach out and you share. You can visit us at www.dalglobal.org/podcast, or you can download and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Until next week, we'll see you again very soon.